Thoughts on stay-at-home dads? Don't you know that a man that doesn't provide for his own family is worse than an unbeliever? Like, you're supposed to be the breadwinner, dude. Got ya. This is a common passage that a lot of people will pull out, 1 Timothy 5:8. But if anyone does not provide for his own family, especially for his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. And if my name rhymed with dark bristles, then I would be scolding you to grow a spine. But there's kind of two things that you got to keep in mind with this particular passage. The first is it's really easy to read this verse, see a lot of he and his, and think that Paul is putting this responsibility to provide for the family squarely on the man. However, that's not entirely accurate. There was a time in the history of the English language, and not too long ago in American history for that matter, that if you wanted to refer to the third person to a group of people, so you wanted to say specifically like he or she should do this, you would go with the masculine. And most languages operate like this. Like Spanish is one of those languages that if you're talking about the masculine, you're using el, and if you're talking about the feminine, you're using la. But if you're talking generally, and there are men and women in the crowd, you go with the masculine. Fun fact, because I have a lot of useless trivia up in this head, the late Tim Keller actually had an interaction with somebody who was asking him, like, hey, why do you use a lot of he, him, and his in your sermons? It feels like you're excluding women. And he had to clarify, like, no, I come from a time where using he would include women in that. Anywho, this is one of the challenges of translating the New Testament because there is a lot of gendered language in there. And so it's difficult to figure out, is it talking specifically to men or is it talking generally to both men and women? And so in the case of like 1 Timothy 5, we look at the beginning of the verse where it says, but if anyone does not provide for his own family. And it's this Greek word tis, which is just anyone. It's not gendered. It's not talking specifically to men, and it's not specifically talking to women. So when we look at what Paul is saying in 1 Timothy 5, what he's not saying is that this responsibility only falls on the man. He's saying if any man or woman does not provide for their family, they're worse than an unbeliever and have denied the faith. So a wife who is constantly just laying in bed and watching the Real Housewives of fill in the blank and not taking care of her children and not taking care of the household is just as bad as the man who stays home and plays video games all day and is not contributing to the household. So when we're reading this, we have to think to ourselves in our context, what does it look like for us and each of us individually to provide for our family? And that's going to look different from